Have you ever witnessed a triumphant procession? The jubilant cheers of crowds, the rhythmic beat of drums, the colorful banners waving in the breeze as a victorious king or general returns home. Throughout human history, these victory marches have been powerful displays of strength and sovereignty. But what if I told you that one of the most captivating victory processions ever described wasn't about a human king at all? What if this ancient poem painted such a vivid picture of divine triumph that it has echoed through centuries, inspiring countless generations to find hope in their darkest moments? In the heat of the Sinai desert around 1000 BCE, a procession unlike any other was immortalized in words. A procession led not by a human ruler, but by God himself. This is the heart of Psalm 68. Today, we're going to journey through one of the most complex, majestic, and frequently misunderstood songs in the biblical collection of Psalms. Scholars have called Psalm 6:8 the most difficult of all psalms, yet its message of divine victory remains profoundly relevant to our modern lives. The psalm begins with words that would become a rallying cry throughout Jewish history. Let God arise, let his enemies be scattered, let those who hate him flee before him. As smoke is driven away, so drive them away, as wax melts before fire, so let the wicked perish before God. These weren't merely poetic words. For the ancient Israelites, they were a declaration of profound truth that despite appearances, despite occupation, despite suffering, God remains sovereign and will ultimately triumph over chaos and evil. Imagine yourself in ancient Israel around 3,000 years ago. The early monarchy period was a time of tremendous transformation. After centuries of tribal existence and regional conflicts, King David had united the 12 tribes, established Jerusalem as the capital, and brought the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred chest believed to represent God's throne on earth, to its new home. It was against this backdrop that Psalm 68 likely emerged. Though traditionally attributed to King David himself, many scholars believe it may have been composed for a specific ceremony, possibly the transportation of the Ark to Jerusalem, an event described in 2 Samuel 6. Occurring around 1000 BCE, this wasn't merely a religious procession. It was a profound theological statement about who controlled history. By bringing the Ark to Jerusalem, David was declaring that Israel's God, not the pagan deities of surrounding nations, was the true sovereign over the land. The psalm vividly recalls Israel's exodus from Egypt and their journey through the wilderness, events that would have occurred approximately 400 years earlier, around 1446 to 1406 BCE according to traditional dating. The psalmist writes, O God, when you went out before your people, when you marched through the wilderness, the earth quaked, the heavens poured down rain, before God, the one of Sinai, before God, the God of Israel. This imagery recalls the dramatic theophany, the visible appearance of God at Mount Sinai when thunder, lightning, and a thick cloud covered the mountain as God delivered the Torah to Moses. Exodus 19 describes how the whole mountain trembled violently as God descended upon it in fire. But the psalm doesn't just celebrate God's power in dramatic, fear-inducing manifestations. It also celebrates his compassionate provision. You gave abundant showers, O God, you refreshed your weary inheritance. Your people settled in it, and from your bounty, God, you provided for the poor. Here we see the agricultural metaphor so vital to ancient Near Eastern cultures. Rain wasn't just water, it was life itself. In a region where droughts could mean starvation, God's provision of rain was understood as a tangible expression of divine favor and care. This dual nature of God, both powerful warrior and compassionate provider, runs throughout the psalm and indeed throughout much of the Hebrew Bible. But who exactly were the enemies being scattered in this victory procession? The psalm mentions several. Kings and armies flee in haste, the women at home divide the plunder. Even while you sleep among the sheep pens, the wings of my dove are sheathed with silver, its feathers with shining gold. When the Almighty scattered the kings in the land, it was like snow fallen on Mount Zalmon. These references likely pointed to specific historical conflicts familiar to the original audience. The mention of Mount Zalmon, for instance, may refer to a battle site near Shechem mentioned in Judges 9. The kings of Canaan would have included figures like Jabin of Hazor and others who opposed Israel's settlement in the land during the period of the Judges, approximately 1375 to 1050 BCE. The psalm contains a fascinating geographical progression charting God's movement from Sinai in the south to the hills of Bashan in the north and finally to Jerusalem. Why do you look with envy, O mountains of many peaks, at the mountain where God has chosen to dwell, where the Lord himself will live forever? This refers to Mount Zion, the hill in Jerusalem where David established his capital and planned to build the temple, though it would ultimately be his son Solomon who constructed it around 966 BCE. The psalmist portrays even the majestic mountains as being jealous of humble Mount Zion, not particularly impressive in height compared to others in the region because God chose it as his dwelling place. This theme, that God often works through the small and seemingly insignificant, appears throughout biblical literature. From shepherd King David to the minor town of Bethlehem, the biblical narrative consistently emphasizes God's preference for working through the unlikely and overlooked. The central portion of the psalm describes a majestic divine procession. Your procession, God, has come into view, the procession of my God and King into the sanctuary. In front are the singers, after them the musicians, with them are the young women playing the timbrels. Praise God in the great congregation, praise the Lord in the assembly of Israel. This likely describes an actual historical ceremony, perhaps the procession bringing the ark to Jerusalem or possibly a regular festival celebration. Processions were common in ancient worship, with singers, musicians, and dancers leading the way. Archaeological findings at sites like Megiddo, dating to around 1000 to 900 BCE, have uncovered musical instruments similar to those mentioned in biblical texts. Music wasn't merely entertainment in ancient Israel, it was central to worship. The Bible mentions various instruments: the kinnor, a type of lyre, the navel, a harp, the halil, a flute, and various percussion instruments including tambourines, timbrels. Professional musicians were employed in the temple service, with some 4,000 musicians mentioned in 1 Chronicles 23 verse 5 during Solomon's reign. What's particularly striking is the participation of various groups in this procession. The psalm mentions, "There is Benjamin, the little one, leading them. They're the great throng of Judah's princes, and they're the princes of Zebulun and Naphtali." This represents the unity of Israel's tribes, from Benjamin in the south to Zebulun and Naphtali in the northern Galilee region. Such unity would have been particularly significant during David's reign, as he had just succeeded in uniting the previously divided northern and southern tribal groups. The psalm then broadens its scope dramatically, envisioning not just Israel but all nations coming to acknowledge God. "Because of your temple at Jerusalem, kings will bring you gifts. Rebuke the beast among the reeds, the herd of bulls among the calves of the nations. Humbled, may the beast bring bars of silver. Scatter the nations who delight in war. Envoys will come from Egypt, Cush will submit herself to God." These references to Egypt and Cush, ancient Ethiopia/Sudan, reflect the major powers of the ancient Near East. Egypt had been a dominant force in the region for millennia, with its civilization dating back to around 3100 BCE. By David's time, Egypt's influence had waned somewhat, but it remained a significant power. The psalmist envisions these mighty empires submitting to Israel's God, a remarkable claim for a relatively small nation sandwiched between major powers. Yet this vision wasn't about political domination but theological truth, the recognition that the God of Israel was not merely a local deity but the sovereign Lord of all creation. The psalm concludes with a cosmic perspective. "Sing to God, you kingdoms of the earth, sing praise to the Lord, to him who rides across the highest heavens, the ancient heavens, who thunders with mighty voice. Proclaim the power of God, whose majesty is over Israel, whose power is in the heavens. You, God, are awesome in your sanctuary, the God of Israel gives power and strength to his people. Praise be to God." Here, God is portrayed not merely as a tribal deity or even a national god, but as the cosmic ruler who rides across the highest heavens. This universalizing tendency represents an important theological development in ancient Israel, the recognition that their God was the creator and sustainer of the entire cosmos. But why does this ancient victory poem matter today, 3 millennia after it was written? Consider what it meant for its original audience. The ancient Israelites were rarely the dominant power in their region. They lived in the shadow of Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, and later Persia, Greece, and Rome. Their national experience included slavery, conquest, exile, and occupation. For people acquainted with such vulnerability and suffering, Psalm 68's declaration of God's ultimate victory wasn't escapism, it was a profound statement of hope. It acknowledged the reality of present suffering while refusing to grant it the final word. And isn't that precisely what so many of us need today? In a world where injustice often seems to triumph, where the vulnerable are exploited, where violence captures headlines, Psalm 68 offers a counter-narrative. It declares that there is a God who fathers the fatherless and defends the cause of widows, verse 5, who leads out the prisoners with singing, verse 6, who gives power and strength to his people, verse 35. This doesn't mean ignoring present suffering or adopting a simplistic everything happens for a reason theology. The biblical tradition, including the Psalms, gives full voice to lament and protest against suffering. But it places these protests within a larger framework of trust that God's justice will ultimately prevail. Archaeological discoveries continue to illuminate the historical context of Psalms like this one. Excavations at sites like Jerusalem's City of David, dating to the 10th century BCE, the time of David and Solomon, have uncovered evidence of the city's growth and development during this period. At Khirbet Qeiyafa in the Elah Valley, archaeologists have found what appears to be a fortified Judahite city from David's time, with evidence of religious practices consistent with biblical descriptions. These findings help us understand the world in which Psalm 68 emerged, a world of regional conflicts, emerging national identity, and religious practices centered on one God rather than the polytheistic systems common throughout the ancient Near East. The text of Psalm 68 itself has been preserved remarkably well across the centuries. The Dead Sea Scrolls, dating from approximately 250 BCE to 68 CE, include fragments of Psalm 68 that closely match later manuscripts. This textual stability is significant given that the psalm is one of the most difficult in the Hebrew Bible, containing rare words and complex grammatical constructions that challenge translators even in antiquity. The ancient Greek translation known as the Septuagint, produced around 250 to 100 BCE, sometimes diverges from the Hebrew text of the psalm, indicating that even ancient translators found it challenging. Modern translations continue to refine our understanding of difficult passages. Despite these challenges, Psalm 68 has influenced worship traditions across cultures and centuries. In Jewish tradition, it forms part of the liturgy for Shavuot, Pentecost, the festival celebrating the giving of the Torah at Sinai. This connection makes theological sense given the Psalm's references to God's appearance at Sinai. In Christian tradition, verse 18, "When you ascended on high, you took many captives," is quoted in Ephesians 4 verses 8 to 10 and interpreted as referring to Christ's ascension. This application demonstrates how sacred texts continue to find new resonances in different religious contexts. But perhaps most importantly, Psalm 68 continues to speak to human experiences of vulnerability and hope. Its language has been adopted by liberation movements, by those facing persecution, by communities rebuilding after disaster. Its vision of God defending the vulnerable and establishing justice resonates with our deepest human longing for a world made right. The psalm doesn't offer simplistic solutions or promise immediate resolution to suffering. What it offers instead is a framework for hope, the assurance that the God who appeared at Sinai, who chose to dwell at Zion, who defends orphans and widows, remains sovereign even when appearances suggest otherwise. Consider how this message might speak to various situations today. To those facing systemic injustice, the psalm declares that God leads out the prisoners with singing and defends the cause of widows, affirmations that injustice does not align with God's character or purposes. To those grieving losses, the psalm acknowledges the reality of death. The Lord has escaped from death while placing it within a larger context of God's sovereignty. To those feeling isolated, the psalm speaks of God setting the lonely in families, addressing the profound human need for community and belonging. To those intimidated by powers and systems that seem overwhelming, the psalm declares that even the mightiest nations will ultimately acknowledge God, putting human power in proper perspective. This doesn't mean we simply wait passively for divine intervention. Throughout biblical tradition, God's people are called to participate in God's work of justice, compassion, and restoration. We are to be, as later theological traditions would put it, the hands and feet of God in the world. But we do this work not as those trying to bring about God's kingdom through sheer human effort, but as those participating in a victory that God has already secured and will ultimately complete. As we conclude our journey through Psalm 68, let me leave you with this thought. The world's dominant narrative is often one of might making right, of the powerful prevailing over the vulnerable, of chaos having the final word. Psalm 68 offers a radical counter-narrative that the true Lord of history defends the vulnerable, establishes justice, and will ultimately transform chaos into cosmos. This isn't just ancient poetry. It's a declaration of hope that continues to sustain communities of faith around the world. It's an invitation to see our own stories, with all their struggles and uncertainties, as part of a larger story that ends not in defeat but in triumph. May we, like the psalmist, find the courage to declare, even in difficult times, "Let God arise, let his enemies be scattered." And may we discover what generations before us have found, that this ancient song of victory still has power to transform lives today. The God of Israel gives power and strength to his people. Praise be to God. Before you go, I want to personally invite you to be part of our growing community here at Prayer Universe. If this video touched your heart or brought you peace, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a prayer or message that can uplift your spirit. But most importantly, I'd love to hear from you. In the comments below, share just one word or phrase of motivation that this video inspired in you, whether it's hope, gratitude, peace, or something else. Your words matter deeply to us because they help guide the content we create for this channel. Together, let's build a space filled with faith, encouragement, and connection. Thank you for being here, and remember, every prayer counts. See you in the next one.